How do you balance being a commercial enterprise with creative thinking, experimentation, and risk-taking?
We always take the view that we've got to make whatever area we invest in and make it better so that the people who live in it before and after are happy with what we've done. I've heard people say very kindly that, we just look to see where Swires are going to build something big and invest, and I try to buy things around it.
What challenges does the ever-evolving consumer economy in China present, and how do you think the Swire Group will be affected by the changing relationship between China and the West?
It would surprise people to know just how many affluent younger people are in China. I'm saying people, let's say between the ages of, say, late 20s to 40. In the West, opportunity for younger people has been sucked away by globalization, low interest rates, high asset prices.
And when does it make sense to go public?
It makes sense to go public when you need capital, which is not readily available in the amount you want it from other markets.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society's signature podcast. My name is Lewis and I am the co-founder and director of UK operations at GYES, founder of The Curious Times and Scrannable's CEO. It is a pleasure to be joined in the interview chair by the co-founder and president of GYES himself, Daniel Jurla. Global Young Entrepreneur Society is an international non-profit organization supporting exceptional young people in achieving their entrepreneurial ambitions. Now to the important bit. We are delighted to be joined today by Martin Cubbon, a director on the board of John Swire & Sons, the parent company of the Swire Group. The Swire Group is a 200-year-old diversified global conglomerate with over 100,000 employees. The group's diversified portfolio of businesses spans from Cathay Pacific Airlines, flag carrier airline of Hong Kong, to Swire Coca-Cola, which has exclusive rights to manufacture, market, and distribute over 60 beverage brands, including all the brands of Coca-Cola Company, to 762 million people. Martin was for several decades in senior roles within the group in Hong Kong, primarily as finance director of Swire Pacific, with oversight of all Swire Pacific businesses such as aviation, property, marine, and beverages, and eventually became the chief executive of Swire Properties, a leading property developer with investments across Hong Kong, the Chinese Mainland, Singapore, and the US. Martin is also a non-executive director on the board of AB InBev, who own most major beer companies like Corona and Budweiser, to name a few. With decades of experience in billion-pound businesses, we gladly have you as our guest today. How are you, Martin?
I'm very good. As you can see from the scene behind me, it's a beautiful day here.
I wish I could say the same here. What gets you out of bed in the morning after all these years in business?
I think, like most people my age, it's the desire to, keep relevant. And working within the Swire Group keeps me, I feel, reasonably relevant. And, there's a great deal of satisfaction associated with that. It's clearly a culture that sits very well with me. I enjoy coming in to work. Colleagues I have are excellent to work with, and the roles I have actually, I think, suit someone who is maybe a little bit out of the mainstream now, but who does have background and experience in both, what the company does and how it does it. So, yeah, in a nutshell, it's about keeping relevant. It's I think it's a challenge that many people my sort of age in their 60s have, and I'm very fortunate to have some relevance anyway within the Swire Group.
What is your story? How did you rise to become a top executive of Swire?
Mainly good luck and maybe a little bit of opportunism. I graduated from university in 1980 in the UK, and it wasn't a particularly great time economically in the UK. I joined Arthur Andersen, which accounting, auditing, consulting firm in the north of England in Manchester, and I qualified as an accountant after 3 years. But still, the UK economy was pretty desperate. There were still high levels of unemployment, and it didn't seem to be a place of opportunity. And I travelled to Asia at university. I really enjoyed Hong Kong, so I applied for a job, and I managed to sort of transfer over to Hong Kong and work in the accounting profession there. And that was a revelation to me. I really, really enjoyed Asia, Hong Kong in particular. And I came to a bit of an inflection point after a couple of years. I loved Asia, but wanted a new, fresh challenge. And a job came up with the Swire Group, was actually in Cathay Pacific. Of course, I'd heard of Cathay Pacific. I was impressed with its product, so I applied. And again, by outrageous good fortune, I ultimately got the job. And so I spent the first 2 years of my life in the Swire Group working in Cathay, which was exotic as it could be in the early mid-80s. It really was. It was a great job. I traveled a lot, met some great people, learned about the industry. Yeah. And really from that point onwards, really, it was just about, working hard and taking what opportunities came my way. I do think my grounding in finance, working for Arthur Andersen, was really helpful. I think it did give me some advantage over some of my peers. But I think it's a lot to do. I mean, no question about a little bit of luck and seizing the opportunity and never losing sight of Swire's ability to, I think, judge you fairly. And, again, you show willing aptitude, hard work. I think anybody can get on. And as I say, I was fortunate. I mean, sometimes timing is important in all these things. And a guy who had been the FD for 20 years came to retirement, just, you might say, as I was reaching my prime, or I would say anyway, if no one else would. And therefore, I probably was fortunate to be the right age at the right time. And I got the job of finance director in 1998, which was again an interesting time to be given that role. Again, I talked about opportunity. I mean, Hong Kong was going through the first Asian financial crisis, and it was a crisis. And sometimes being thrown into the deep end, as a baptism, for a senior role was very fortunate for me, truthfully, because it's only when in these sorts of situations where your efforts, your decisions are very much in focus. And I think that helped me a great deal. And we navigated our way through the financial crisis reasonably successfully. It was a great sign of the enduring strength of the Swire Group that even in a crisis, and it was, I mean, it wasn't so apparent in the West, but in Hong Kong, it was a significant crisis with 5 years of contracting economies. And we came out of it, I think, stronger, leaner. We did sell a few businesses, but the businesses which remain to this day are, I think, ever stronger from it. So, yeah, and as Lewis noted earlier, I eventually got a new job in 2009 running a property business. Again, it's about opportunity. I've been around, I got experience. A chap who had run that business for 20 years brilliantly, set wonderful foundations, came for retirement, and I was around at the right time, in the right place. I mean, that is life, I'm afraid. I mean, you've got to apply yourself, but, never lose sight of the fact that sometimes you need a bit of luck and the desire to seize the opportunity.
After the Chinese Revolution in 1948, Swire had left mainland China and has now re-entered in a big way. Do you have any thoughts on Swire's exit and re-entry into China?
Although I'm sort of reasonably ancient, of course, I don't remember the intricacies of the Second World War and China's own revolution, and in a sense, its movement away from engagement West in 1948, 49. But there were people around at the time of the Joint Declaration who did remember that. And I think, yeah, it must have been in your mind. I mean, some organizations, some, well-known organizations, I think, reflecting on those times, did not make the same commitment to Hong Kong and China because they were concerned about whether the wording of the Joint Declaration be honored, and some famously, re-domiciled. Now, that was not a route Swire took, and that served them very, very well. So I think, yeah, there was a background on the history. Swire has a long history, was aware of that history, did not see any chance of it being replicated. China moved too far to develop in a way which was, well, nothing you might say is irreversible, but the forces were so strong and so positive, it was just very hard to imagine, there being, an about turn by the Chinese government on its own economic and social development, which would have had to have happened for the joint declaration not to be honoured.
On the 1st of July 1997, sovereignty of the British colony of Hong Kong, where Swire Group is based, was formally transferred to China. That must have been an unsettling time for the business. What do you think secured Swire's continued success in the region?
Strangely, it wasn't. I mean, obviously, I was there in Hong Kong at the time, and I wouldn't say it was unsettling, actually. I mean, the people of Hong Kong, it was a time of joyous celebration. I mean, it's maybe hard to imagine, from here in the British Isles, but there was a real desire among the people of Hong Kong to be rejoined to the motherland. I mean, current politics might suggest that otherwise, but there really was a desire to be reunited. And I think everything that both governments had done leading up to the handover, promoted stability and, a continuation of the way of doing business, the way of life. And gosh, I mean, that's what was delivered. I mean, I lived in Hong Kong for a further 20 years, and I still go back and forth there. And, well, of course, the pandemic has changed things. And of course, current geopolitical tensions, have changed some things. But broadly speaking, what was promised, way back in 1985 with the joint declaration is broadly being delivered. Now, many people will differ with the current politics, in particular the imposition of the national security law, and say that was not on the table. But that's, some people will bound to say that. And there are differing views. As I say, I go back to Hong Kong frequently. I lived there through the handover for further 20 years, and I really didn't see any change in my lifestyle. And I didn't see any change in business opportunity and broad freedoms. Now, I know this is a sensitive area right now, but certainly living my life with a young family in Hong Kong was completely unchanged by the passing of transition.
And did Swire adjust its business plans at all?
Yeah, Swire, I think, were very astute in recognizing the positives associated with this transition. So in the mid-'80s, it made it clear, having read the joint declaration and what it meant for Hong Kong, that it was absolutely happy with it and immediately proceeded to invest heavily in Hong Kong. Most obviously at that time with the purchase of the land, which became Pacific Place, probably the most iconic property business we have. And shortly thereafter as well, the listing of Cathay Pacific and its, rapid growth. It was an absolute commitment to Hong Kong, knowing the changes that were coming. And they, on the surface, were very, sensitive for Cathay Pacific. In particular, the rights to continue to fly in and out of Hong Kong were vital. And it demonstrated, real commitment to that, which I think was emphasized further with, big investments, and big investments not just in Hong Kong, but also in China. So, yeah, I think basically the group was well positioned and happy with the joint declaration. And so when the handover came, it really was seamless. I mean, there was lots of, bunting and celebration around the town at the time. You knew there was a big event, but really, was it a big event given all the commitments that had been made? As it turns out, no.
What challenges does the ever-evolving consumer economy in China present, and how do you think the Swire Group will be affected by the changing relationship between China and the West?
I think the ever-changing economy, I think there are two issues. I mean, one, as I mentioned before, it's the rapid availability of 5G and the ubiquitous nature of smartphones and how that changes consumer behavior in a way that's, other than very smart young people like you, I suspect, many people in decision-making positions can't really appreciate. If you live in the UK or live in America or Europe, it's just that far ahead. I think also what is perhaps different are the demographics in China. I mean, it would surprise people, I think, to know just how many affluent younger people are. I'm saying people, let's say, between the ages of, say, late 20s to 40. because there's been such rapid sort of urbanization and so many, well-paid jobs have arisen for bright people, there's been an explosion in the middle classes in China, and it's happened to relatively young people. And that's sort of, I think, assisted by the fact that so many of them still do live at home, something that's not as common in the West. And you think about the issues affecting the West itself over the last, 5 to 10 years. There's this notion that opportunity for younger people has been sucked away by all sorts of different forces: globalization, low interest rates, high asset prices. And while some of those issues are still prevalent in China, they're not to the same degree. So, the fact that there is a young, affluent middle class, in a way, I don't think still exists in the West, or is not the money in the West typically are older, middle-aged and older people. And that has proven to be a socio-economic issue which governments wrestle with today. And because there is a large younger middle class in China, and because they're so adaptable, and because their tastes change so quickly, it does present very significant, I think, consumer-related challenges in terms of knowing what's the next big thing, because it changes so quickly. And I think, as I say, it is good news for young people in one sense, because I think only the young, who are living that sort of lifestyle can best appreciate, the direction of travel. And that's going to be very important in terms of deciding where to invest your money. And I say one is catering for a different demographic than historically we have done.
So you've embarked on a variety of creative projects with Swire, which is the wonderful Opus in Hong Kong with architect Frank Gehry, which undoubtedly couldn't have happened without investment and a leap of faith. How do you balance being a commercial enterprise with creative thinking, experimentation, and risk-taking?
They are all intertwined. I think if you're an organization like Swire Properties, which has been around a reasonable amount of time and sees itself as an entity which really wants to contribute to the community, you've got to invest in it, and you've got to sort of, we always take the view that we've got to make whatever area we invest in and make it better so that the people who live in it before and after are happy with what we've done. And that very much underpins the reason why we tend to spend a lot of time and a lot of money building the infrastructure around wherever we have a centre. That's true in Admiralty, Wan Chai. It's true in Happy Valley. It's true in Chaoyang in Beijing, and it's increasingly so in Shanghai where we operate. We want to build the infrastructure around it. We want to invest in the soft elements of the infrastructure, whether that's restoration of old buildings, whether that's provision of parks, open air seating, whatever we think it takes to demonstrate to the community that we've made the place better. We've not just built a commercial entity, we've actually made the whole place better. And it's often reflected in asset prices surrounding where we invest. I've heard people say very kindly that we just look to see where Swires are going to build something big and invest, and I try to buy things around it, because we know you guys will spend additional money on the broad infrastructure and make the area better. And that helps us, I think. And Frank Gehry and Opus, which is where the conversation started, may not be wholly in this category, and it's an isolated one-off building. But right. We were lucky in that we had a relationship with Frank Gehry, all due to my predecessor. And well, it was a great site. The group were fortunate to have bought that site in the very early 50s when prices were low, and on it is sort of a classic building of its type of the era. And because it was such a great site, we knew we had to do something special with it. We couldn't just put any old square block on it. It would have been in the front, I think. And I say, having a relationship with Frank Gehry was just our outrageous good luck, because he did put something, which he really did put a lot of creative thought into it. And again, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. Look at the prices for, the few apartments that are in that block. It tells you that the public like it.
Right. Well, you did build a work of art, so congratulations.
I can't take any credit. I mean, the relationship was due to my predecessor, and Mr. Geary is a talented guy.
So you were the CEO of Swire Properties when it went public in 2012. How was that experience, and when does it make sense to go public?
It makes sense to go public when you need capital, which is not readily available in the amount you want it from other markets. I think it's that straightforward, really. It's a somewhat mechanical decision. I mean, obviously, there are other effects associated with being public. You're in the public eye. Arguably, you face greater scrutiny by authorities and regulators and the public at large, and that can be good, I think. But fundamentally, it is about access to capital, and that's why we did it. It was a bit of a the ultimate listing wasn't traumatic, but the process had its elements of trauma because we tried to list 2 years or 18 months earlier than when we did, and it just coincided with some real shocks to the financial markets, and investors lost confidence in the space of a few hours. You may not remember sort of the debt crises associated with Greece, which exploded out of nowhere and created a short-term credit crisis, and that just panicked various investors into not wishing to make new investment, and we were right in the middle of that. So we still could have listed probably, but we'd never got a fair price for our assets. So we went through a somewhat convoluted process to list about 18 months later, having sold a very large asset. So in a sense, we addressed the capital issue, the short-term capital issue, by selling an asset. And then we obtained our listing to obtain long-term capital by a distribution in specie of the shares, i.e. we gave a certain number of shares to the existing shareholders in the parent, Swire Properties, so that Swire Pacific, so that Swire Properties then became listed.
Right.
So a slightly convoluted process. And it's true that we've not really made use of that capital, which is our public stock. And I imagine that's been frustrating. It was a little bit frustrating for me, and doubtless my successors to some degree. And the frustration is that having a public stock means that you can make very significant transactions. Most obviously, it facilitates merger and acquisition. And there have been points in our history where having such stock would have facilitated a merger, which I think, would have been very positive for both entities. And maybe that opportunity will come our way, in the not too distant future. It's hard to say. But there's no getting away from the fact that we've not been able to use the capital in the way that was originally designed. That's incontrovertible fact. And there are other issues associated with being public, which are not always welcome. In particular, the stock price, and it can be depressed for, probably correct reasons, you might say. But that is then in the public eye. That can affect one's credit rating in a way that if you're private, you don't suffer the same sorts of issues. So yeah. It was a very interesting experience, and I think still worthwhile, but the jury probably is still out.
Right. And when you originally brought it to be public, did you have a plan with what you'd use the additional capital for?
Well, the additional capital, as I say, the short-term capital came from the sale of a very large asset, Festival Walk, which was a big shopping office complex in Kowloon. And we used the money basically to, partly we distributed it up to the parent, and they invested in various businesses. But Swire Properties used it really to, push its China investments, actually, and Hong Kong investments. We did reinvest a lot of the capital we kept into what turned out to be very profitable Hong Kong investments. In particular, I was fortunate to inherit some land, but we bought some land sensibly. We bought old buildings, and we knocked them down, and we built a number of residential towers in the mid-levels, which coincided with a bit of a boom in the property market. And so we did very well. And having that capital gave us the confidence to really push ahead quite aggressively by our standards. And it also included Frank Gehry's Opus as well. You know, the capital to build that, you know, in part came from the listing. Well,
So-
not from the listing, but from the sale of Festival Walk, which preceded the listing.
While you were CEO of Swire Properties, once it was a public company, how was your relationship to the stock price? Did you look at it every day or every hour?
No, I wouldn't. No, I truthfully, my interest in it was, well, really associated with, is it high enough to want to use that stock, you know, either to raise money or to facilitate an acquisition. If there's one thing which I would say is a positive, which the listing gave us, it's access to a very wide range of investors, you know, who are smart, are thoughtful, have pointed questions, and you learn about your own business from people like that, in a way that, you know, you can discuss issues with your colleagues, but maybe you don't always get the hard truth. But when you're dealing with investors who demand, you know, consistent, good, long-term returns, you learn. And so, yeah, the stock price was relevant for that process because the intense questioning, you know, would certainly follow periods of low stock price. But, you know, my own confidence in the business was such that I didn't worry about, you know, these short-term dips in the price or even medium-term dips in the price. But I did listen to what people said who invested in the business, and it's hard to say that, you know, that it didn't change some decision making. You know, you do listen, do learn, and sometimes think, well, actually, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good idea. Maybe we should, you know, move more in that direction. And that could be, you know, most obviously in things like dividend distribution. And it can be positive. You know, sometimes you get, you know, you get confirmation that that the investor thinks your policy, practices, plans are good, and it's good to hear that from, you know, third parties. You're just hearing it from yourself and your colleagues who are sort of, you know, more likely to be on side with your plans. So there are definitely some benefits associated with having tough taskmasters, which are, you know, the investors.
What is Swire's time perspective as a company with a very long history? And did Swire Properties going public change that?
No, you're spot on, Daniel. I mean, they do have a long history and they do have a very long time perspective. And that's really helpful for people like, well, yeah, people like me in those roles. You're given the backing and have the comfort that, you know, if your thoughts and plans make sense, and, you know, there'll be rigorous questioning of those and there'll be lots of debate. But once, you know, you have the confidence of the key shareholder, the Swire Group, you know, you get an enormous amount, truthfully, of patience to continue with your plans, even though inevitably there'll be shocks to the system, you know, whether it's most obviously in the recent past, COVID, or, you know, financial crises, you know, which affected Hong Kong in the late 90s and again in 2008-9, SARS, you know, which again was a big impact. But, you know, that's a great thing about Swire's long-term perspective and trust in the, you know, in the officers of the business which they appoint. You know, they spend a lot of time thinking about the individuals, whether they're appropriate. But once they've decided, you get, you know, a great deal of their backing and confidence in you. And that's what Swire's, you know, not from every company. There are other companies in the same type, if you like. But a long-term focus is key. You know, I would argue that too many businesses have been damaged, certainly in the long term, by short-termism, you know, by the desire to make money in the short term with, you know, adverse long-term consequences. That Swire's are never guilty of that.
How do you start your day for the challenges that await you?
For example, this morning I went for a bike ride. Again, you can see from behind me the weather's pretty good, and I like cycling. But I love being in the outdoors, generally speaking. I mean, I find it very, clarifying in the sense of, you know, you put aside all of the thoughts and you let your mind wander, and that's very helpful. When I was living in Hong Kong and working in Swire Properties, I quite often used to run to work, and people will be surprised when I say that I only used to cross 3 roads until I got within 200 meters of the office. There it was a bit more built up. But on the way, it was all through the country parks and over hills. And it was, what a wonderful way to start the day. I mean, completely relaxed, free of any concern, ready to sort of tackle the day. So I'm sort of relatively early morning person. And I think actually having some sort of exercise early on is really good in terms of giving you a positive sense of let's get on with whatever it is you're tasked with.
Yeah. How long did you cycle for?
1 hour, 37 minutes.
Wow, nice. Your job is or was definitely very, very high pressure. What do you do to relax? Do you have any time for hobbies other than cycling, of course?
Yes. Again, it goes back to the Swire culture of understanding that, you know, there is pressure and people need a break from it. And again, the family have always been good at making sure not just that there is availability, that there is the possibility of holiday, that you should actually take it. I mean, when I started in the group, it was almost mandatory to take a long break at the end of the year. I mean, I think that was steeped in some history, which, you know, said that if your home was in Europe and you lived in Hong Kong, you know, it's a long way to go when there was no air flight. So, you know, one long holiday every 2 years made sense. But it's still a characteristic that, you know, the desire and the need to be able to break free from pressure is understood and provided for. So, yeah, I always, you know, had holidays, you know, sometimes disrupted a little bit by business, but that has, gosh, been a facet of everyone's life over the last 10 years. I mean, the rapid development of technology has meant that everyone's always available. And, you know, that has some detrimental effects on lifestyles. And I see it in my kids in particular, who are constantly being tasked or being questioned, you know, over the phone, over email, you know, all hours of the day. It's tough. I mean, I don't have to, I mean, of course, there are some intrusions, but I again, in this desire to feel, you know, involved and useful, I don't mind them, truthfully. So, you know, if someone calls me and asks me a question, I don't mind. You know, it reinforces this notion that I'm still relevant and have something to offer.
Right, yeah.
But I think for younger people, you know, who are constantly inundated with questions from the boss on whatever, you know, particularly coming as it might do on a Sunday night or a, you know, Saturday lunchtime, it's more than irritating, and I don't think it's always too helpful in terms of the development of the business and the individual.
Do you want to move on to some fun questions? Search it up a little.
Why not?
All right, Martin, dogs or cats? The heated debate.
Oh, of course I do like them both, but cats probably. And since I still travel and work, it's punishing to have a dog and travel so much.
Having lived in Hong Kong for a long time, what is your favorite Chinese proverb?
Well, it doesn't speak well of me, I don't think, but it's probably the great General Sun Tzu, and, you know, his proverb around understanding and knowing your enemy.
It says the one, isn't it?
It says more about my sort of probably overly confrontational nature. But yes, Sun Tzu's Art of War is a fantastic read. I don't know who translated it first, but it is. You know, there's so many thoughts, ideas, proverbs in that. I'd recommend it to anybody.
Yeah,
that's in a book I got when I started at university called Lies, Damn Lies and Statistics. It's definitely a book worth reading. Darrell Huff. I think it's still in print, even though it was first written in the late 70s.
Okay, this one's kind of weird, but does your car have a name?
No. It's nice. A private family joke that, you know, I'm married happily, but I do have some exotic Italian girlfriends. Yeah. That's a Ducati and an MV Agusta.
If you could have one famous person from history on your team, who would it be?
I think Lee Kuan Yew. I think such a clever, thoughtful negotiator, such a visionary. I mean, just his achievements in Singapore are just staggering when you think about the time he came to power and the issues he had to wrestle with. But whether it be sort of geopolitical, military, economic, he seemed to be able to sort of work his way through all of them. And, you know, died friends with the good and the great and the powerful across the world and across dividing lines. I mean, that is quite unusual. So yeah, having him on your team, I'd feel confident we're going to win.
If you could time travel, what one piece of advice would you give your younger self as you entered the business world?
Yeah, learn not to be so confrontational. Discipline yourself to, rid the strong desire or the strong force, which is conscious, which is bias, in your views. I mean, I think all of us to some degree suffer from confirmation bias, but you need to be surrounded by people you're very happy to tell you that you're wrong.
Yeah.
I recall an appraisal which a very bright man gave me. If you are confident or persuasive or confrontational, you can be guilty of pushing through completely daft and stupid ideas. And thankfully, again, I've been helped a great deal by an organization which, trumpets, everyone should have a voice, and enough sensible people telling me that I'm wrong. But I wish I'd have had the good sense to sort of realize it myself at times and sort of not blunder into things.
Absolutely. Striving to get that honest advice.
Are you the conference goer type?
I think if I have to give you a definitive answer, I would say no, but there are always exceptions. And earlier I was talking about sort of the benefit of being a public company and the interaction with investors. I think sometimes these investment conferences do bring you face to face with people from diverse backgrounds and with differing expertise, but it does open your eyes to some thoughts and ideas and views around the world, which proved to be helpful to me. But there's lots of them which are just a total waste of time. I should say I met my wife at a conference, so I shouldn't be too critical. And it's not what you expect to meet your wife, but there you go.
Are there any conferences that you would recommend?
I mean, again, this is probably saying more about where I am in my own career development, i.e. at the very end of it. But there's a conference run in Salzburg, and I think it's going to be rerun in Salzburg this year for the first time for 3 years. And it's basically on corporate governance, and it's called something like the Salzburg Global Governance Conference, and it's every October. And it's I've attended it virtually twice because it had to be virtual. And I just thought, again, in terms of the sheer diversity of views and issues of events and forces in the world, which should and have shaped business behavior, it's a good place to listen to some thoughtful, smart people, again, from different walks of life. They're not all finance people like me, or necessarily even direct business people, but they have perspectives which are very useful to business, I think.
Are you going to be attending this year?
I can't, because it clashes with a board meeting I've got to go to in America. Otherwise, for the first time, I'd go to it live, which is probably better than the virtual one, but c'est la vie.
Yeah. Well, America sounds pretty fun as well. So,
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I have zero to complain about in terms of my corporate experiences.
You were on the board of AB InBev. Is the beer industry a growth industry?
It certainly is in China and Asia generally. So China, India, Korea, Southeast Asia. Yeah, it's a growth industry. And I think that reflects, demographics. And also, I think, an approach to beer which is a little different from the approach to beer in the Western world, where there's still this notion that, beer is drunk by middle-aged and older people, where I think the way it's promoted and marketed in Asia is much more toward young people. And there's been a lot of effort to, change the physical taste of the product. So from, very, bitter, hoppy, heavy drinks to lighter, sometimes you might argue fruitier drinks. So I think there's been a sensible adaptation to, the younger taste and the person most likely to buy it. So I think the growth story in Asia broadly is good. It's not that you shouldn't continue to develop, AB are developing, many new products and, getting into other segments, most obviously related segments. So, non-alcoholic beer, lower alcoholic beers, fruit additions to beers. So they are adapting and changing the product line, but Asia is a pretty good market. I think there are bigger challenges associated with those demographics in the West, where older people are getting older and drinking less, and replacing those consumers with the younger people in the West is more of a challenge. They do a fantastic. I mean, I'm very impressed with them, and I think it is true that having that role is helpful in my Swire role, and vice versa. Having different perspectives and how different management cultures work is really good for you. So, I'd endorse others obtaining that diversity of thought by spending some time working in other businesses. It's helpful, it's no question.
Yeah. And are you allowed to comment on the differences between the culture and between AB InBev and Swire? Is one better? Are you not allowed to say?
No. Again, AB InBev is very international. It has to operate in every market in the world, and maybe that breeds more diversity. Obviously, Swire's focus is on Asia. Other than that, I see many of the same characteristics. I mean, AB want to be around for a long time. They recognise they've got to invest in the communities. They recognise they've got to do the right thing by, the water table, climate change, waste. They obviously share some of the issues that Swire Beverages do, and are as earnest as Swire Beverages are about making a difference and demonstrating that they're as good as they can be. So there clearly are differences, but probably a lot of it is born out of it's a single product, not a conglomerate.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. It is ubiquitous.
Yeah, it is actually. Well, the other night, some of the people that we're staying with at the moment were drinking Leffe, and I looked to the back and I was like,
there it is. Yeah.
AB InBev. There it is. Anyway, we'll bring it to a close. So thank you so much for coming today. On behalf of GYES, we really appreciate it, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for your time.